Yakopo Chanupa Wakancha Yuhache Waki Elohai.
I'd like to welcome you all here today. Thank you for coming. I'd like to first off start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands we're meeting on today, the Kunai people, and like to acknowledge the elders past, present, and those still to come. And I'd also like to acknowledge any elders that are present in the room today. First of all, thank you very much for coming today. My name is Troy Jennings and I will be facilitating today's forum. And I'd like to introduce you guys to our special guest speaker today and my co-facilitator, Dr. Rocky Crocker.
First, I want to thank you all for being here. I also likewise want to thank and acknowledge those who have come before us. The original caretakers, custodians, ancestors of this land, and those of you who are not Aboriginal, everybody comes from somewhere. You have ancestors. You bring those spirits with you as well. And so we've all come together. My role here isn't to give you answers, because on any given day, I don't have many. Can't use them all up. But, you know, it's just to share a bit of things that I've seen in our communities in North America, among Native communities, as well as working in mainstream health. Trying to balance the two between being, active in traditional ceremonies and those ways of healing, as well as in the more Western approach to this. But they're very different. And yet at the same time, the goal is to do things that are healing. So I thought it was interesting, the very first thing we did in talking about closing the gap is that we brought our circle together tighter. So we literally have closed the gap. We can deem this success. We're done. Thank you for being here. We've got it on tape. And but that is actually symbolic of a coming together, in a circle like this. So traditionally, as I've shared before, traditionally we came together as a community in a circle. We came together as a community. The thing about a circle is, there's not a leader. We all are the same distance from one another, basically. There's something unseen and unspoken in the middle of this that really helps create this container whereby that we can talk and have discussions. So the afternoon goes, I'm going to share a little bit with the permission of our group this morning, a little bit about messages that came out of those discussions to put out in the circle this afternoon. I'm going to share a little bit about what I see in the North American situations that are somewhat similar to what we're talking about as far as health and health workers and how to close those gaps. And at the end of the day, this is about having good discussion and good communication in a meaningful way. What I hope is that something comes out of this that either helps you as an individual but also helps you in the work that you do, helps you in working with one another, helps you in working with community. So we're going to talk a bit about that. Traditionally, the way that we start these circles, and these are considered to be conversations or everything in traditional Native American life, everything is a prayer. Everything is considered to be sacred. You are sacred. Life is sacred. Creator has put us all here. And the other thing is that we have a view of the world that you're here because you're supposed to be here. All right? That there's a purpose for that. On any given day, I may or may not know what my purpose is in that, but to show up at the things that we're led to show up for, and then while we're here, to be fully present. the discussions we have here, the things that individuals may share, it's a circle, it's a container there to stay in the circle. So if there may not be anything private or confidential shared, that's fine. If there is, it stays here. But if there are lessons that we're to take out into the world to close the gap, those are the things that should go out in a good way. And hopefully there'll be pieces that we all can carry, walking side by side to do the work that's ahead of us to do. And that's, the thing about having gaps is that those present us with opportunities. They can be barriers or they can be opportunities. I choose that they're opportunities. And I think that's the way that I want to enter into this. So something that we do traditionally is that we use sage. And we smudge ourselves. The idea with that is that to cleanse ourselves. If there are energies, whether that we're carrying, the idea is to kind of get rid of those. The other thing that the sage does is it goes into spaces between us, to connect us and to seal this tightly. So what I'll do is just to light the sage and allow it to go around and do what it's going to do. You can smudge to the extent you can. If you have sensitivity to this, just acknowledge it and pass it along. That's fine. Okay. So there's not a right or wrong way to do this. So this is not part of the oral examination at the end. Just kidding. So with that, I kind of want to enter into this that way, and then just share an opening song. So I'll share a song. I'm going to be using these clap sticks. These were made by Troy and presented to me at the last time. So we use these in ceremony. I use these in a traditional sweat lodge sometimes. We use these at other times. But I want to sing a Native American song that basically says, Creator, help the people. Bless the people. We're trying to do things in a sacred manner. Help the people. So I'll share that song with you. Oyate wama yankapo, oyate wama yankapo, oyate wama yankapo, chanupa wakancha, yuache waki Elohai, oyate yani pintacha, le chamu Elohai, oyate wama yankapo, chanupa wakancha, yuache waki Elohai, oyate yani pintacha, le chamu Elohai, oyate wama yankapo, oyate wama yankapo, oyate wama yankapo, chanupa wakancha, yuache waki Elohai, oyate yani pintacha, le chamu Elohai, oyate wama yankapo, chanupa wakancha, yuache waki Elohai, oyate yani pintacha, le chamu Elohai. Oh, I'm a takiasan. And we always, at the end of these things, say, Ahoma Takiasan, which means to all my relations. The idea here is that we aren't doing this just for ourselves. that we're connected with all things, with each other, all peoples, with the plants, with the animals, with the sky above, with the earth below. We're connected with all those things. We live in relationship to all those things. And therefore, we're not just doing these things for ourselves. Even if we think we are, we're not, because that affects everything around us. And so that's the idea with that. So, a couple of things. We did have a chance to sit this morning and talk a bit about some of the experience of being Aboriginal and a health worker. So in sharing that, I just asked if there were things that we talked about that could be brought into this circle. Because again, to respect the confidentiality principle of these circles. And so there were a few things that I want to put out there. And these are things I will tell you that are not different, from the things I experienced in North America. First of all, is that not just the importance of community, but the meaning of community. For people who have not grown up in traditional cultures, community isn't the same as your neighborhood. Community isn't just a location where people live and their paths interlace. Community is a living thing. Community is extended family. Community nurtures us and supports us and holds us. And that's not a Western construct. And so part of this basically is just saying that one thing that would be helpful in closing the gap would be if you're not sure what community means, it's not a dictionary definition. It's it's support each other and learn from each other and share with each other. Secondly, as a part of that, because of the fact that community is all areas and aspects of life, is that in considering and developing programs and interventions and ways to close the gap, there needs to be conversation with the community. There needs to be conversation with the community. Oftentimes programs by people who have their heart in the right place and who really do want to see things happen, and they create programs that make sense from a certain worldview, and yet they're very like, who doesn't really know me, make a shirt for me. The likelihood of it really fitting me is not good. So the idea of getting to know me a little bit and understanding me a little bit, maybe even take measurements so that the shirt will fit, but to try to create something for someone without really knowing them and the community, or without them having input, that's a challenge. And again, this isn't because people are being ill-intentioned. This is just something that happens. Also, there's just acknowledgement that there is a gap. We talked a bit this morning about the fact that I mentioned this, the last time I was here, but our brains, we have two parts to our brains, so the left and the right part. Mainstream culture, mainstream society is very left-brained. This is about logic and rational, and this is where math comes and those type things come in. It's a way of order, the construct of time, of measuring time, like in minutes and hours and creating clocks. That's a left-brain thing. In traditional communities, in the community I'm in, they talk about yaki time. Well, it starts when it's supposed to start and it's over when it's over, right? And you typically get the day of the week kind of close. That's usually right. But beyond that, that's not an important construct for us, And so the idea here is that the left brain operates that way. The left brain, if we want to describe an experience or something, we write a 100-page paper to describe that experience and create that. People who grow up in traditional cultures, people who are in Aboriginal communities, whether that's with a small a or whether that's with a capital A, meaning Australia, basically much of what we are taught to do and learn to do is to communicate very differently. The right brain, the language of the right brain are images and symbols. And the right brain is connected with our emotion, is connected with the things that regulate our bodies, our heart rates, our gut, all these things are regulated there. And so you see on the wall over here something on Close the Gap that basically, if you're looking at that tells a very specific story. And those images is people raising their hand and saying, we want to close the gap. And these handprints are from people who are working in this system. And there are Aboriginal people there, there are non-Aboriginal people there, but they've joined together to do that with the symbol of the serpent, which is about creation and recreation and renewal and starting over, and we have to start over day after day after day. We go to sleep, we wake up, we take a breath. It's another chapter, it's another day in the life. And when we're talking about closing the gap and working in relations with one another, that's the way it is. It's dynamic, it's not a static thing. But to describe what that means to people who aren't used to thinking about the symbolic meaning of things, again, it's a 100-page paper. So for some people, they have difficulty grasping that meaning. For other people, the 100-page paper won't work. Our education system is one that the mainstream education system is deeply pointed in one direction. In our country, there are funding issues, and so the first thing they do, in Arizona, where I am right now, is that they've eliminated a lot of the art and music programs. Okay, and they've actually in Tucson they eliminated a program that really was talking about the history, the actual history, not the Western version of history of the native people in Arizona. So those were the first things to go in the educational system. What does that do is that takes away meaning and value and learning what really people's history was, and it takes away the ability for people who aren't accustomed to doing this to begin to understand thinking this way. And there have been studies that people look at images, and within a fraction of a second, their mood shifts. And then they show that within a few minutes after that, it's affecting their body's chemistry and their brain, and ultimately their immune system. That you can look at an image and it changes the chemical reactions going on in your body almost instantaneously. So it still is an effort to not acknowledge the lived experience of people. There's an effort to not permit or allow native languages, native history, native ceremonies to be done. It's more covert now. It's kind of like under the surface where there used to be policies that if this was going on, people would be put in jail. They would be put in prison. So that shifted, but the current is still there. And so there still is this effort to say, I'm speaking my country, to say, you're not like us, therefore you need to be like us. All right? And that doesn't lend itself to having good communication and working out constructive solutions to that. Okay? The other thing that came out is, it's such an interesting thing that there's a pendulum swinging in this, that you go basically from being in a situation whereby people's prejudices, some people don't have a filter. They've never had a thought, they didn't speak out loud, okay? But their prejudices and the mean spirit part of that comes out, all right? And then all of a sudden things change and they're told that's not okay. What happens then is that they're afraid to ask questions. So one of the things brought out in the group this morning was to let people know if it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to ask questions of Aboriginal health workers to understand what's going on. What is this about? closing the gap? What is it about these things? What about the view of family and the view of community and the importance of that? It's okay to ask those questions. Many people welcome those questions. So the fear of not being politically incorrect is just the other side of political incorrectness. It's the same coin. It doesn't promote discussion. And to be in a situation where you can have acceptance and openness and good conversations one with another, basically you ask questions. That shows that you're interested in learning as opposed to going with some preconceived idea about what may or may not be. And this works on both sides. I'm the community that I'm in Arizona now. I have a job that's at an integrative center, health center, that we're promoting educational programs and within medicine embracing the fact that Western medicine doesn't have all the answers. Therefore, we're looking for self-care and mind-body things and embracing acupuncture and chiropractic, whatever there may be, all for the purpose of healing. So there's this gap there, and then there's a gap between that community and the Native community. And so within our Native community, there are people who don't want to see people with light skin sitting in ceremony. That's a real thing. There's a good reason for that. There's a great historical basis for that. But likewise, on the other side of that, there are people that don't want to see, Native people really succeed in the healthcare system. And that's a reality. So part of this is there are important conversations to have that have to be held in a way that people can trust each other and have meaningful discussion about that. And we presume that we know things about other people. Those are just our presumptions. I will tell you that on an even given day, I'm not sure who I am. So how am I supposed to know anything about someone else and what they may mean and what they may stand for and understand? So I think that at a high level, those were the principles. I've embellished them a bit with my own experience. So for the group this morning, I apologize for that. You have the permission to smack me about a bit if you want to, or correct me, and I'm totally fine with that. But I think that the thing to come out of with this is that there's just a need to be able to have conversations in a situation wherein they're safe, they'll be honored, that we enter openly with that. And that is the way that traditional circles have been since there were two-leggeds walking on the earth. My sense is, the Choctaw is like a deer clan. Deers hang out in herds. I'm sure they talk, right? I mean, there was a time when the two-leggeds and the four-leggeds could communicate. I think they still do in some ways, but we've lost some of those abilities. Mainly because we're walking upright, we're above them, we think we're better than them. But that kind of plays out in a lot of ways. So anyway, the thing that I want to do with this is just to kind of just share a little bit about things that maybe seeds to germinate some of the discussions that we have here. So the other thing is what is the gap? We talk about closing the gap, and this has been a national initiative, which I applaud. It's found its way locally, which I applaud. But the solutions typically don't come, at the central government. The solutions come with individuals stepping into situations, realizing that they have the opportunity to be a change agent, and that things don't have to be the way they've always been. But we've got to enter into this with a situation where there's mutual respect, and openness. And so that's the thing in community. The community I'm in is so interesting because I spent all my life, really, most of my life, just in the Western mainstream world. And I show up in this community, and for the first 2 years that I was there, first of all, I spoke only in ceremony. I was there with fire there in the community. But it was 3 years before anybody asked me what I did for a living. What I did was not the view of human doing. I'm a human being. Who I am, what's in my heart. That's what was important to this community. And that was so healing for me to be able to have a situation that's like, oh yeah, no, so you're a medical doctor and the image of what that, therefore that's what I am. You know, so you know, you as Native American, well, they have an image of what that is. Breaking out of that isn't easy because we're humans. And yet at the same time, therein lies a real opportunity, I think, you know, for good dialogue. It's just to realize Creator has us all here on this planet for a reason. And He created us unique because we have our own gifts that we bring into the discussion. And the idea that you all in some way are involved with the health system. And the idea for healing in the system, as we walk and breathe, we are the medicine for the system. You are the medicine for your communities, for your families, for the system that you work in. You know, as am I in the community that I'm in. And so the idea of this whole idea that life is sacred, that all people are sacred, that we're equal, you know, and to gain an understanding from the past, but not to leave perception of the past. We're in the present. You know, I saw a thing yesterday of if you're living in the past and fearing the future, you're totally missing the present. And that's somehow I find that there's a lot of truth in that. So I've actually talked way more than I intended to talk already. But what I would like to do is just to kind of open this up and in a traditional way. The way that we would do this in a circle like this is to use something in a sacred circle. We use an object and we pass the object around, and the person holding the object can speak, and they call them hochoko or talking circles, sacred circles. But the reality is that they're listening circles. You know, how rare is it to sit in circle and 20 people actually listen to you, even to hear your name? How rare is that people pause and are silent to do that? So the thing that we find is that if people are given the opportunity to speak, there's a barrier that's been broken down in that. That closes the gap, maybe a millimeter, but that closes the gap already to do that. We're going to talk a little bit about the importance of story, and what I want to do is really to get your input and your feedback. Hopefully, if you will, what I'd like you to do is share your name, a little bit about yourself, and why you're here.
As Rocky said, I'm Troy. I think as I've already introduced myself, but I guess the reason I'm here is for one, I sent out all the invitations to get in the first place, but about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, I saw a need to get people together to start a movement, if you will, to get people actually talking, to have a dialogue, to stop having 50 meetings a month, to fix the one problem that we could all meet together every now and then and just have a dialogue. So for me, it was the ability to be able to bring people from all different levels, from all different departments, from all different designs, different jobs and everything, and just bring them into one safe space where everyone was equal. I have a lot of passion about this project and I love what I do. I love what I do. I love the people that I work with. I love that I can work for my people. It's why I do things like Close the Gap and why we got everybody in our organisation to put our hands up. It's why I continue to strive so hard to work with everything that I am to try and get improved health, improved well-being for our people. I've learned a lot of hard lessons along the way. A lot of hard lessons. But the biggest thing I've found is that we've got to involve community. If we don't involve community, we don't go to community, we don't ask community what they want, we might as well be throwing money and coins and time and effort against a brick wall and hoping it'll come back to us.
In Native communities, in the community at large, that's a rare thing. The beauty of this is that a lot of the healing that is happening in Native North America today is because people are getting in touch to their traditional ceremonies and ways, all of which are done in circle. So the ability to meaningfully share and sit with people, in a way that it kind of pulls us together, in a unified manner, is part of the healing. Until 1976 or 77, I think it was 76, there was the Native American Religious Freedom Act that for the first time in decades, Native American ceremony was no longer illegal to be performed. They were outlawed. And yet they remained underneath the surface. But what happened was, over time, is that these communities who had lost their language, many of them had their children taken away, and that still happens in the court system today. They've lost their ceremony, they've lost their culture, they've lost the land they were on, they've lost all of those things. That part of the healing has been to get back in touch with those things that sustained them for thousands of years. And that's being who they are, where they are, and the amount of wisdom that's in those teachings. It's so interesting to sit with some of these elders and, to have an elder who talks quantum physics, okay? But he talks about it in terms of the fact that science is just now catching up with what we've been knowing and teaching for thousands of years. We talk about the Western science, but the wisdom and intelligence that has existed for centuries because of people who could be quiet and observe and learn principles of life from all that's going on around them, again, as opposed to a 100-page document. That wisdom has been things that has taught them how to live, how to relate to each other, how to survive. And so on this continent, this is the oldest civilization on the planet. 40,000 years plus or minus 10, I don't know the exact number. It's a long time, it's a long, long time. And part of that has been because of the intelligence and the resiliency and the wisdom that has been there. So it's the experience in Mississippi where my ancestors were, is that people came in and your choices were that you could be acculturated, you could be killed, or you could be forced off your land. Choose one. It's your choice. Choose one, right? Without realizing at all, the implications of that, the impact of that, the wounds of that played out then in the fact that people now were treated as something less than a person, and as a result of that, what happens is that there's a wound, there's a trauma. The thing that I want to talk about very briefly and then move on, but the fact that there is, particularly in mainstream America, when the idea of intergenerational trauma, people say, well, that's just made up. Okay, it's like intergenerational trauma. But that's just a convenient way to excuse bad behavior. I mean, that's what I hear people say. And that's not it at all. We don't think twice about our hair color, our eye color, our skin tones being passed down for generations. But also, the way that we've survived in response to trauma and tragedy, those tendencies are passed down. Emory University, out of Western science comes traditional wisdom. Sometimes they finally find their way into it. But they did a study, and I don't endorse this study. I think it's a terrible study, and yet it really makes a point. That they took these mice And for some reason, mice are the enemy of the Western scientists because they do horrible things to them all along. So they took mice, and what they did is they fed the mice cherries, and when they would expose the mice to the smell of cherries, to the scent of cherries, their little mouths would water, and they would get all this "I'm hungry" behavior and get ready to go with that, right? And then what they started doing is they would introduce the smell of cherries, and they would shock the mouse. And they would do that just a few times. And very quickly, what happened when they gave the scent of cherry is that the mice went into a fear response. They would cower in the corner and shake, and they were measuring the chemicals, the hormones in the body of his. So that's not a huge surprise, right? That's a learned behavior. Then they bred those mice. And without any electricity involved at all, they gave their offsprings the scent of cherry. And those young mice had a fear response. Because the survival to that conditioned thing was fear. That's the way it survived, and that was passed on genetically. It wasn't that the mouse parents sat down with the mouse and said, if you smell this, run. There wasn't that. It wasn't passed along that way. So the idea of the fact that people learn, their bodies respond automatically, again, not left brain. It's not like, okay, I'm going to be afraid, or I'm going to run away or run to it. But the idea that those things can be passed along, there's a scientific basis for that. And so people's response to repeated trauma, to things that look like, I would imagine if things smelled kind of sort of like cherries, they would have the same response, right? Even though the trauma happened generations ago. So they need, first of all, just acknowledging the fact that intergenerational trauma exists, that it's real. It's not an excuse for anything. It is a lived experience that mainstream culture doesn't appreciate. And really, when I talk about this, again, on the other side of the world, I see people's eyes glaze over. It's kind of, yeah, whatever. It is lived experience. And that's true all over the planet. That's the way that we're wired to survive. Our responses to trauma are the things that help us survive. Unfortunately, after a few generations, they may have outlived their usefulness because even though there's a conditioned response, it's a different environment, a different situation, hopefully, and therefore now there has to be a way to have healing for that. And so healing comes from understanding, from mutual respect, from acceptance, from having the ability to express yourself freely and openly without having to have fear of something bad happening to you. And that's not been historically the experience. If you take away someone's language, they're not going to want to talk. If you take away someone's culture, they're not going to want to share what's going on. That's survival, But to me, part of the gap, whether it's in the health system or health disparity or life in general, for me and our country and our community, part of closing the gap there has to do with having conversations about that and understanding that even though we have a different experience, that doesn't devalue or in any way make the other person's experience any less real. It's an experience. It's not something learned in a textbook. It's an experience. And you're not going to learn about this. Most of our traditions were passed down orally. They weren't passed down, with written documents. And it's still true today. Ceremonies that are taught orally and experientially. But having conversations is important. So I wanted to throw that out. The other kind of just caveat here, and then I'm going to let you talk again, is just to understand a little bit about the dynamics in our country. I shared this morning, so I apologize to those of you this morning for repeating myself. But in our country, our first contact, our ancestors' first contact with non-native people of North America was in 1492, best we can tell, thereabouts. So it's been 500 plus years ago. And then in 1775, after numerous people, the French, the Spanish, the British, and then our homegrown folks, that in 1775 there was a Declaration of Independence from Great Britain, and in 1776 there was a new constitution for government of the people of what those originally 13 colonies became the United States. And of course it's grown up until the last two states were added in 1959. So there are now 50. But right as the Constitution was being drafted, within a year of that, one of the very first things that was formed was the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And that was formed to deal with the Indian problem. Okay? Is that there were people whose land we just took, and they're in our way. Okay, they're in our way. So to deal with the Indian problem. And so the treaties that were, I don't know of a single treaty that was written that wasn't broken. With Native people. And so the idea was, again, forced acculturation, take your children away, put them in schools where horror stories of abuse go. Take your language, take all these things away from you. Take your diet, your way of living and being away from you. Put you in government housing. We lived in round things. They're square. What do you do with corners? They're just wasted space. I'm just saying. So the idea of that, of circle and living in circle and in harmony and the path of and all that stuff was foreign to them. So the people whose job it was to either acculturate and colonize or force them off their land, or if they get in the way, there are repeated stories of massacres in our country, all the way up through the late 1800s. So those are the people who were entrusted with the Indian Health Service. The people making those policies, they say, and also responsible for the health of the people. Now here we are 200 plus years later, and the government structure is the same, right? So there's not this open, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, there's not a great understanding of what it is to be a Native American. There's not this openness, but there still are, there are policies in place that are supposed to protect people and allow them to have their governments and autonomous ways of life. But when money gets tight, as I mentioned earlier, programs that get cut are those that don't affect the mainstream culture. Our legislature in our country, it's all about people that have money to influence decisions and the mainstream. It's not about the underserved. It's not about people who are native or indigenous or different. So that's the way it is. So the health system still, if I look at the community that I'm in and communities around, some of these have Indian health services, hospitals, Indian health services, and non-indigenous, non-native people to be in those centers. A lot of those are people who have a government, like a physician I had an experience with before, that we ended up in the emergency room with from a ceremony I was in with this young Native American guy, and he had an injury, and I go in. I introduced myself, but I don't say, well, and I'm a doctor, I don't need to say that. But this doctor who was there for 3 years paying off a government loan, it's not important to know the people do any of that. He didn't even look at him, and he had a foot injury, and he very roughly examined him. He was making disparaging comments the whole time, and basically was just going to send him on his way, And I said, excuse me, but have you considered the fact that he could have something in that foot, a foreign body? And the guy just looked at me and said, well, do you know what small percent of things that would show up on an x-ray like that? And I said, at that point I did sit back and said, as a matter of fact, I do. I said, because I'm at this point, this guy's demeanor changed, but he still didn't talk, with his nephew. He looked at me and talked to me and was like tripping over himself. So this happened a year ago. This isn't a from my childhood coming up. This is blatant open, and because he hasn't taken the time to appreciate this is a human being. We are all equal. Nobody's any better than anybody else. This person has a lived experience, and this young man is a man who struggles anyway, and then to be treated that way, it kind of broke my heart and kind of made me angry at the same time, you know. So that was just an example of, you think that things have gotten better, but these services aren't designed with the input of the community. They're not designed in any way like that. This is the way that Western medicine is delivered in the United States. Well, I will tell you, having worked in Western medicine in the United States and still involved there, that system isn't working for non-native people. People in our country, the healthcare system's broken. So why would I think that our system is going to work any better for anybody else? But then add the fact that you're devaluing people and not, treating them equally on top of that. So to impose things that aren't working already on communities that it doesn't work for them, even if it was working, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, And they're in our country, that's part of the discussion, part of the opportunity. I'm fortunate enough to be at an integrative center. We value traditional healers. We value other ways. We're trying to find ways to bring those in, integrate them, and whoever comes in the door, regardless of what their values and what is it that they need from their perspective, and making it about each individual with all their differences, as opposed to, well, this is the way the system has to work. Okay, so I just share that as an experience. It is so important to understand that people need to have the opportunity to share. They need to have the opportunity to have their story told. There's so much healing in that, to sit in a circle and just let people talk about their experience and their woundedness a bit. You have to build a trust before being able to do that. But initially, even letting people talk about from their perspective, these are real gaps or issues, and maybe this could be considered or done, or a good place to start. So there was work done in Brazil. I'm not Brazilian, in indigenous communities by the Dulwich Center Foundation. And what they did is that they looked at things that are kind of rules. Would you pull on that? Okay. Never mind. There we go. Thank you. See, I can't do everything myself, right? We have to work together. But basically, these are rules for indigenous sharing a personal story. Okay, so I want to put this out there just to give you a little context. Now, and there are 7 things. So the first one is, everyone has the right to define their experiences and problems in their own words and terms. 2, everyone has the right for their life to be understood in the context of what they have been through and in the context of their relationship with others. Number 3, everyone has the right to invite others who are important to them to be involved in the process of reclaiming their life from the effects of trauma. Number 4, everyone has the right to be free from having problems caused by trauma and injustice located inside them internally, as if there's some deficit in them. The person is not the problem is the problem. Number 5, everyone has a right for their responses to trauma to be acknowledged. No one is a passive recipient of trauma. People always respond. People always protest injustice. Number 6, everyone has a right to have their skills and knowledge of survival respected, honored, and acknowledged. Number 7, everyone has a right to know and experience that what they have learned through hardship can make a contribution to others. This is something. So the idea here, that whole document is about the fact that my experiences are my experiences. This is my reality. They may be different from someone else's experience, but the ability to just speak authentically, without judgment, and have people just listen is a healing, powerful thing that begins to close the gap. So the first thing is communication. If you have communication and opportunities for that, then you can go into problem solving. But to problem solve before you have communication, how do you do that? You know, we talked about having from the community. How do you do that if you don't have communication? How on earth can we close gaps, whatever those gaps are, in the health system or not in the health system, without communication? You know, that's true within community. That's true between communities. That's true between the health system and people that need access to that system. And health systems, by definition, should be healing, not wounding. So, and again, the concept I said earlier is that you are the medicine. This begins at places like this. And so part of it is there an opportunity, you know, for some kind of ongoing forum that just follows the rules of mutual respect. There's not a leader. You basically, the only rules in traditional ceremony is that when you speak, we don't attack one another. We treat each other with respect. We listen respectfully. We can agree to disagree on things. We don't see eye to eye on things, but at least we know that we can come in and be treated respectfully and be heard. And it begins sometimes just as simply as that. So I do want to respect, I really have talked more than I intended. I apologize for that. And at the same time, these were things that are kind of on my heart to share. The thing that I would like to do is to pass this again and just ask you, from your perspective, is there something, you know, and I talked about this in terms of baby steps. I can talk about, well, let's close the gap. I can talk about world peace. But we talk about this traditionally and ceremonially, and we talk about praying for things. The way that world peace begins is that my resentment of my neighbor, I start to deal with that a little bit. And that's my first step toward world peace, right? It begins with me, it begins on a local level, and then it begins with to have that historically hasn't been a forum for. They haven't taken place. So I will pass this. You are not obligated to have a solution to the problem here or speak. I'm not trying to put anybody on. That's the thing, respectfully. It will go around and sometimes several times in circle, and you'll get to the point that people have said everything they need to say. And if you've already said everything you need to say, that's respected. That's okay. This isn't oh my God, what am I going to say? This is you. I would like to do that just so that collectively in this moment, if we see something that can help or might be at least a subject for further discussion, while we're together, let's put it in the circle. That's a great place for it to be. Okay. So, no, that's good. As it should be. As it should be. No, seriously. You know, what I hope is that discussions continue and deepen. And you know, at the end of the day, a couple of things. Number one, the healing occurs. Good communication, rapport, relationship. We're all human. We all have the same creator. We have different histories, different backgrounds, but we are all here on this planet at this point in time. And if we each do our part, if we each go from this place and do something just a little different in the way that we interact with each other, that is a huge deal. That's something that in some cultures never happens. Right? That's, for us, where I'm from, to see things like that begin to happen are great. But there are things that require relationship, you know, building relationship, communication, because therein lies the healing. The second thing is that, you know, the idea, I'll throw out, it's the third and last time I'll say this today, but each of you are the medicine for this ailment, for this illness. And your ability just to carry that, to realize, number one, you have unique gifts and abilities that you can bring to this, you know, and it's important to do that. Number three, ultimately, what I hope to see in our country is that we don't have to have, you know, a Native American Health Service and Bureau of Health Service. You know, all people should be treated with respect. All people should have equal access to good health care, and all people's perspective on that as they enter in should be taken into account. So that there's this flavor health care and there's this flavor health care. That's really, even though we're addressing the problem, we're perpetuating the division in that. So at the end of the day, people should have access to equal care. That's not the case in my country, you know. So, but the idea with it is that begins in places like this, to where it's not like, and we have the same thing. I mean, the comment that was made of, well, how do I talk to one of them? Have a mindset. One of them, they're a human being. How do you talk to any human being? You open your mouth, right? You respect them. You listen to them. It ain't no different, to use very poor English, but I'm from Mississippi. What can I say? That's the way it is. So I encourage you to find a way to continue discussion here. Again, all of these are, they're kind of small steps, like I was talking about, but small steps, that's the beginning of a meaningful journey. And the fact that if you're taking small steps by ourselves, but as individuals, it's hard. But at the point in time that we're taking small steps together, it's uplifting and strengthening, and we begin to get somewhere. We have a ceremony, and in that ceremony there's this huge tree that we use, and that tree gives us life for the ceremony. We take that tree somewhere, and that tree, basically, when the tree comes down, it never touches the ground. We're standing underneath it. Now, if I was there by myself, I would be hammered into the earth, right? But if we're all in this together, we're all carrying this together, the mindset of doing that. And it's interesting to see, all of a sudden, at first, it's very awkward. And then all of a sudden, this tree is moving smoothly because we are working together to make that happen, right? That's the image I get from this. So thank you. I want to we open in certain ways and close in certain ways. So I want to close the day with another song. And this song basically is both a thank you song and a healing song. And the song says, Grandfather Creator, thank you. Grandfather Creator, thank you. We're doing this in a sacred way. Thank you. Thank you for a good healing. This is the beginning of a good healing. Okay? What happens from this point on is in your hands. It's an opportunity to have forums. Those may look like this. I may need to look like something else. They're uniquely yours. So the fact that you took over, that's what needs to happen, right? That taking over isn't an individual, but it's a shared thing with the group. And that's an exciting thing to do. So the song is about that. So I just share that song in a way as a thank you to you, as a thank you to Creator for a future, a future that's healthier than the present and healthier than the past. And so I offer this really as a thanks and as a prayer for you. Shela pila maya e Puka shela pila maya e Pila maya e Pila maya e Lava Wito zanewa maya kucha Pila maya e Lava Pila maya elo, pila maya elo, pila maya elo, Tunka shela, pila maya, tunka shela, pila maya, pila maya, pila maya elo, we chose anewa maya kucha pila maya elo pila maya elo pila maya elo pila maya elo we chose anewa maya kucha pila mai. Home Takuyasin to all of our relations. Thank you. Chanupa wakancha, yuache waki elohai.